Hey, everybody. I am so excited here today to have actually a gentleman who's been a friend of mine for many, many years. I always kind of, when I start to say I've been 35 years in franchising, it starts to date me and makes me a little older. And Keith is one of my friends from my early days in franchising way back. And he'll talk a little bit about his background. So you'll hear a little bit of that timing. But even back in the day, had run PuroClean, and we were partners in PuroClean and kind of working together a little bit at that time, and when we were with Service Brands. And so I'm so excited to have Keith today on our podcast, just to learn a little bit about what Keith knows in terms of strategy on franchising. But also, he went on to be the head and the president of FranConnect, and they had a window with their software on so many different franchise companies that it gave Keith incredible insight, industry by industry, as all those units were using the backbone of FranConnect software. And so Keith helped build that company, and then today has Gerson Advisory Services. And so Keith actually advises franchisors and private equity in growth and strategies and acquisitions. And so Keith, thank you so much for being a longtime friend, but also for sharing with our listeners today. Welcome.
Thank you, Todd. The pleasure is mine. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Hey, well, I brought it up, so let's go backwards. And how did you get into franchising even before I met you, or how did you get your start?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I was a professional musician going back to the age of 13, but it was really clear to me that if I ever really wanted the life, the house, the wife, the kids, the white picket fence, it was not going to be from being on the other road as a rock and roll musician. And my father was a very accomplished law enforcement officer for LAPD. Headed up, I should say, he was sergeant of detectives homicide for one of the toughest divisions in LA. But he was also very entrepreneurial, and growing up in the Depression, he knew that he needed to do more than just that. It was meager salaries. He had opened up a restaurant supply warehouse, and he also got the rights to run pro shops and snack bars in Southern California. So I actually grew up as a teenager, spending summers actually supervising kids that were a lot older than me in college and everything else. But it was the, kind of a fast food solution. It was hamburgers and hot dogs and popcorn and cotton candy and whatnot. But that really was the only skill that I developed outside of my musicianship. So early on in my marriage to my wife, Marilisa, I knew that I needed to do more. I opened up at that time a newspaper. Many of you may know and remember when we had physical newspapers, and I turned to the classified section and I found an ad for McDonald's restaurants. And that was the one thing I could do. I got a boost from my mother who, because, what am I going to do? Give rock and roll references? My mother wrote a letter in her maiden name talking about what a phenomenal supervisor I was and led multi-unit locations. And I ended up getting the job with McDonald's restaurants that I parlayed into, after being there for a number of years, to Jack in the Box restaurants, where I was given the opportunity to be a big part of creating their franchise system from its inception. And that made way for me going into Mrs. Fields Cookies for the next 9 years, where I ran their franchising program from its very inception. And that just put me on the path for what is now a 52-year run in franchising.
Oh my gosh. I am embarrassed to say that I did not know the early period that you came up through McDonald's and then Jack in the Box and Mrs. Fields. So what a surprise to have those other brands in there. That's so awesome.
Well, back in that day, and probably to this day too, when you have McDonald's on your resume, it opens up a lot of doors for people that aspire to be a McDonald's. So one thing led to the other.
Okay, wow. So many questions pop up. So Jack in the Box obviously has grown, and they had their growing days and good days and some bad days probably, and then back to good days now again. I think that they're doing really well. So you were there for some of the early franchising days. Any kind of unusual stories around that? We haven't talked about that. This is unrehearsed, but
Yes. I will tell a very specific story as it relates to Mrs. Fields Cookies.
okay.
So they had brought in a gentleman, may he rest in peace. He's been gone for a number of years, but he had come in and for 1 year attempted to get franchising started for Mrs. Fields Cookies. And he actually was said to have been the guy that was behind, oh my goodness, what was the chain? He was actually behind Burger King's success back in the day with their franchising program. But he never got it off the ground, never sold a franchise. So they were willing, based on the success I had with Jack in the Box restaurants, to say, okay, well, what we'd like you to do is to start the program from its inception, since you also have the experience with McDonald's, et cetera, and help us get this done and get this done right. But the reason that they decided to go into franchising was the fact that they had a tremendous balloon payment that was due that they could not make. And so the problem is they also had a lot of contingent liabilities as it related to the leases that they had signed and guaranteed, and they wanted to get out of them. So they came to me and said, what we want you to do is sell all of these underperforming units to some sucker. No, they didn't say sucker, but to somebody that was willing to take them on. And so I said, the only way that I would accept that is if you give me full and total responsibility for the success of these franchisees. I don't want to just sell them. I want to support them. I want to ensure they get the training and development that they deserve, et cetera. And so I took over everything at Miss Fields other than distribution and product development on the franchising side of the business. So within a matter of getting that FDD out there, the very first franchisee I signed was one of our most successful district managers. And that person knew exactly the location they wanted and saw the potential, and they just took it and it just to the moon. Once that first franchise sold, there was no stopping us. Then people were lining up for the franchises. And so I kind of got the important notches on my belt for having done that. But then we also got to the point that, for example, I had to sell a franchise on Waikiki Beach in Hawaii, and we sold it for $1 because it was losing so much money. But the fact is all but one of the franchises that we sold that had been existing underperforming locations ended up outperforming their corporate counterparts. So that just, again, put me on the path that there's growth and scaling, but then there's responsible growth and scaling, which is what we're all focused on. And that was really what put me on this path and that I've stayed on ever since.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's amazing. Well, that says a lot about your integrity at that time. But then as I've come to know you, you've always operated that way in your career. So that's really great. So was that prior? Mrs. Fields had merged or had bought out Doc Cohen's brand. It was Great American Cookie. And then, so was that before David Barr and Doc Cohen and stuff were on the Great American side?
No, they were on the Great American side. And Mrs. Field had now gone out on a roll-up of the industry.
Yeah.
So when I was there, we had acquired Original Cookie Company, Hot Sam Pretzels, and other companies that were in the specialty dessert segment, if you will. And so I was there when we had started our discussions with Great American Cookie Companies.
I see.
But it was during that period before we finalized that acquisition that I was working directly with Doc Cohen, was working with David Barr, but from my seat with Mrs. Fields Cookies.
Right. Okay. So I was curious if that period overlapped, and so you were there at the time. That's great.
When I made that decision, and by the way, so sorry about the alarms here. There was a period of time in which I'm working with the franchisees of the various systems and with the management of the franchisor. And as I'm going around, I'm hearing everybody say that at that point in time, and I have a deep abide for Mrs. Fields and what they've accomplished, and they're still here, and they're still a great company. But at that time, it's like every brand I was speaking with was saying that they felt like, I need to get a better phrase than redheaded stepchildren.
Yeah.
Very incorrect these days, but no one felt like they were really They were just an add-on after the fact.
Yeah, right.
Franchisees were saying if I had wanted a Mrs. Fields franchise, I would have bought one. And they were taking umbrage over this. But then when I really saw just how challenged the organization was, that we didn't really have a true integration plan at that time, it became clear to me that as I don't feel like my voice was being heard, that I could no longer stay in that role. If you start questioning the strategies, then, you either have to change it or you've got to find another home.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, because I came back to the Mrs. Fields brand and they told me that they felt like redheaded stepchildren. So when I knew that every single one of the brands felt that way, it was clear that it was going to take integration and more thoughtfulness. And at that moment in time, it was early on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting. So then how did that wrap up, or what was the next step in your journey? Because I know we met when you were at PuroClean, I think.
There were a couple of steps. When you talk about a 52-year career, and I start talking about the various jobs I've been with, I've got to remind people this was not in a short period of time. This is over decades that I did this. I spent 38 years as a franchisor before a dozen years at FranConnect. But I decided after my brick and mortar experiences in QSR and then specialty retail, which is also brick and mortar, that it was time to take a look at the other side of the equation. I thought, finding something that made it easier for people of all walks of life to be able to afford and come into a franchise system. I ended up working with brands including Alpha Graphics, where I had ownership of operations, aspects of operations, marketing, and franchise sales and development. From there, I also went on to ChemDry, where again, I had responsibility for operations and development. So I'm kind of a utilitarian player, marketing, training, operations, et cetera. And then after ChemDry experience, then came my time with PuroClean, where I was its president and chief operating officer, 2 roles back before Steve White came in. Steve's a great guy, and we never worked together, but we're still dear friends. Talk about that brand. And it was then that I had went to Utah, joined a private equity company, had a handful of franchise brands that I oversaw. And then it was time to go ahead and start the next chapter in my life. And that was to join what many called the dark side and become a supplier with what became the most revered of the franchise management software systems, Mrs. Fields Cookies, which, as you said in your introduction, gave me a catbird seat to really understanding what was working, what wasn't, what were best practices that people were using. And so that really rounded out my education.
Right. Well, and I can remember back then when we had met with you guys on several companies and utilizing FranConnect as a partner with Amit and whatnot, that you had already such great knowledge of every industry. So it wasn't just necessarily FranConnect and being able to see every industry. It was really having that background beforehand that gave you great wisdom and knowledge so that you knew how to apply the software, which I don't know, when I talk to younger folks today and we talk about our careers or taking our time or gaining experience, you gained so much experience across so many different segments and then applied it to the software that you continued to succeed at every level. But it took time. Right?
It did. Somebody that we have in common, who is the CEO and founder, Alicia Visconti of FranServe. I'm going to take a phrase that she used. She said, "We speak French." That was really it. At FranConnect, I was the least technically inclined individual on that team, but what I could do is speak franchising like nobody's business, and was able to just basically carry back and say, these really are the pain points that we're experiencing. And there's a saying that, nobody needs a reciprocal saw. Nobody needs a hole in a wall. What people want is a bookshelf, and so that's really where I learned so much about the fact that to the technology, it had to be about a specific problem that people are trying to solve. Nobody needs technology. They're looking for a very specific solution. And I know we're all very, very excited about AI. I am, as much as anybody can be. But I also know that what is old is new again. And just like was said, I think it was Tom Peters, that, the higher the tech, the higher the relationship aspects have to be in play, because obviously you can feign a personality when you're AI, but, the heart and being able to read people. And my major in college was a psychology with a music minor. And so I've always been a student of behavior. And that's to this day really where I focus my interest. So what I learned was a lot of people will buy the technology, but what they really need, though, is somebody who knows how to drive engagement, to drive adoption. And so
Right.
this is, I don't mean this to be sacrilegious from a FranConnect vantage point, but the fact is the best CRM or the best franchise management system is the one that you use. So to have the greatest technology in the world means nothing if you can only get a fraction of your franchisees to use it. And so
Right.
that became something that I spent a lot of my time and effort looking at. How do we really drive more adoption and engagement?
Yeah, yeah. Well, talk to us a little bit about either the FranConnect experience or even today with Gerson Advisory Services, where you're advising. What are some of those methods or techniques that you guys use to improve or scale a business? I mean, what are some of those strategies?
That's a great question and not an easy one to answer, but I will
Right.
tell you that typically you've got to put yourself in the shoes of your franchisees with whatever it is, whether this was FranConnect and technology or whether or not in Gerson Advisory Services, that it's easy to go ahead and say, here's the program du jour, which happens in the executive suites, without really giving enough consideration to the bandwidth and the capabilities of franchisees to execute those strategies. So, for example, in a lot of technology companies, what they will do is have somebody who's the administrator on the client side, on the franchisor side, and they train that person. But one of the shortfalls is that person doesn't necessarily have expertise on the operations side, on the franchise development side, training and development, marketing, et cetera. So, and then what happens is, so they can't really speak for and advocate effectively for those
Right.
departments.
Right.
And the other challenge that you have is turnover. That oftentimes that person who you took all that time, made that investment, and leaves the organization, and
Right.
now people are there just playing the telephone game. We've all played that in our youth, where you start with something and how it ends up down the line is entirely different.
Right.
But that's what happens in these organizations where the myopic are teaching the blind.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah. Exactly. We've seen that in systems that we've been in where personnel at the franchisor continues to turn over, like you say, and they're not necessarily the operators of the doers like the franchisees are. And the franchisees are there for many, many years. So when you were at FranConnect, for example, then did you, to get adoption of the system, if you won a bid and were going into the system, would you gather up some of the key franchisees and actually work with them to actually format the system and
Yeah,
get
well,
that?
let me not play into on my part a false narrative, because obviously it's a teamwork, and FranConnect has its franchise success managers and support team members, etc. And my job really became so much focused on teaching our team members on how to effectively work with their clients, what to look for, how to address, and that, and again, I love FranConnect to death. I think that they're the best of the best to this day. But the issues and the challenges you have in terms of making sure that you do a slow roll, that you go ahead and you're testing it, you're piloting it with your franchise advisory council, or you're getting a group of franchisees of different makes and models, so to speak, to just help get it running and to get that proof of concept, even though it's long proven. I mean, FranConnect, I think, is going on its 25th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been around. But a lot of it is just teaching others how to train the trainer, and teaching others in terms of, like, when people said back in the day, well, FranConnect is very robust, just basically saying that's not always a compliment. Sometimes that's just a euphemism for complex
Yeah,
and
right.
complicated. So, we really, really have to keep it simple. So I was proud of the work that we did on that front in terms of really getting our success coaches and other members of the organizations trained from a franchisor's perspective, and I've been a franchisee as well, from a franchisee's perspective. And that's critical. And to this day, I still provide assistance to them on that.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, tell us a little bit about Gerson Advisory Services and what you're up to today and what the kind of things you're looking for and how do you help?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a utility
Yeah.
guy in
Yeah.
which I'm adept in different areas, and so I'm a guy that gets bored easily, and
Yeah.
so I love the fact that I'm able to pivot and do so much. I have clients that I do training and development and create educational content for. I have clients that I sit on their boards and their board of advisors. I have clients in which they want my sales acumen, sales, operations. So it's just great to be able to pivot around because sometimes we in business get pigeonholed. So, okay, well, if you're the president of FranConnect, it means this, and this is what your role is. But I always knew that I had capabilities went just beyond the little pigeonholing, and I like making a difference wherever I'm at. So, Gerson Advisory Services, I chose that name specifically because the acronym is GAS, and I didn't want people walking around saying Gerson has gas. I wanted them thinking this is gas or the fuel that drives the success of franchise organizations. So that's what I do. I help franchisors find their success by helping their franchisees find their success.
Oh, that's great. So pouring a little fuel on the fire for their
You
growth
got it.
is perfect. I love it. Well, that's great. Well, and then Keith, one of the things I didn't know about you, of course, you mentioned you were a musician. I think at one of the IFA events, I don't remember how many years ago, 12, 15 years ago, all of a sudden I
Mhm.
see you up there with the band. And so tell us a little bit about your band or your performance. Well, and then I think as I've had conversations with you, you guys have traveled around and you do quite a few performances here and there.
We do. I started my professional music career at the ripe old age of 13. I had been classically trained. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles because my
Okay.
father needed to be where the action was on the police force. And so my first band was a Motown soul band. And so I just had the greatest rooting in some of the best music that had ever been written and performed. But then bands were coming out with keyboard players, the likes I'd never heard before, like Ray Manzarek of The Doors, and out on the radio was Light My Fire. And so I'm learning those songs by ear, and one thing turns into another. And now I'm almost always at that point in time the youngest member of the band, playing with much older guys. Great venues. I've played with some very well-known people in my life and very well-known bands, but to this day, I'm still performing. But my wife, I tried to impress her when I met her in a psychology class in college with my musical pedigree, only to find out that not only had she charted and not only had she toured extensively and been on like every TV show of the day you could possibly imagine, she even opened for the Rolling Stones and had billing above the Byrds for anybody who remembers, Turn, 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 the
Yeah,
song,
yeah, yeah.
in the tambourine band. So yeah, so she and I have been playing in bands together for many years. I've had my own projects, but
I I
she
did
and I
not know
are
that. So both of you are playing. Okay.
so
Wow.
we have several groups that we are still playing in to this day. We're playing many times over the course of a month for city concerts series and in clubs at wineries at special events, and I love it. Now you mentioned seeing me on stage. I had the privilege, thanks to Therese Tilgen and Gary Gardner, who were really open to a pitch that I made along with Steve. My goodness, help me out here, Todd. I'm coming up blank on Steve's last name.
Steve Romanello or from way back on IFA or what?
Steve from Franchise Update. Why am I forgetting his name? That's terrible. And Steve passed a couple of years ago, but he and I both made the pitch to Therese and Gary.
Oh,
Wouldn't it be great if we put together a franchise band made up of franchisors that are well known to many and get up on stage and perform? And they gave us that opportunity. And then it was commandeered by the IFA. And
yeah.
we were playing that for a number of years. And that was a joy to bring all that talent to the
Yeah.
stage and get up there and
And
perform.
that came to be known as Fran Jam, right? There was
No,
a
no,
Fran
no.
Jam event that was the party. You were kind
Yeah,
of the band itself was
the franchise all-star band is what it was
Franchise
referred
All
to.
Star Band. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, we have some amazing musicians that are in these circles, and of course, I was honored when you recently asked me if I would go ahead and perform piano at the prayer breakfast for Fran Faith at
Yeah.
IFA, and
Which
that was a
which that was really a lot of fun, and we appreciate you heading up and leading the music for that and doing the keyboards because it did make the praise and worship very lively for that event. So it was really great, and it was also interesting that our events are open to all faiths. And so, of course, we had several of the songs we did were Old Testament scriptural songs. Several were New Testament. We're open to, Jewish and, and Christian and, in all faiths, it's non-denominational. And so at one point in time, I think you had told me that by heritage, you're Jewish. Is that, and so I had never
that's
really talked to you about your faith, but I think you had shared that you were Jewish, I think, in your upbringing. And so I thought maybe you can kind of talk about that if you're open to that.
yeah, very open to that. I knew that I had come from as far back as my family could tell, and my family on one half, my father's side, were from Russia, and on my mother's side was never quite clear, but I think that it was settled on Austrian. But I just didn't really know to what extent that heritage ran back. So I did a 23andMe, and it came back saying that I was 99% Ashkenazi Jew. That type of a Jew amongst its ranks included Albert Einstein and some of the most brilliant doctors and scientists and just really learned smart people. But I hadn't known that because it was not that all long ago that I found out that I was actually 99% at the my family was not a very religious family, and though I grew up in a Jewish household, we would celebrate the high holy holidays, just like Passover occurred right at the same time that Easter was happening, and we would go to my grandparents' house where they would conduct the traditions.
Yeah, have a Seder.
So yeah, exactly. So, but at the age of 13, neither my brother nor my sister were bar mitzvahed or bat mitzvahed, but I guess I was the guy who would see it through. So I was bar mitzvahed at the age of 13. But again, my Jewishness, if I were to tell my whole story, is not a very storied career because during the 60s and early 70s, it was all the stereotypes about rock and roll musicians was fairly true, and so I was not the most faith believing individual or leading. I always had spirituality, and I always I always felt God's presence, but I was ignoring Him
Sure.
on many levels. So
Just
that's
like a lot
a
of biblical heroes, a lot of the big
sure.
names in the Bible were all very much the same. God works through broken people. None of us
Yeah,
are perfect,
yeah,
so we understand
and
that.
I was far from it. But I had wake up calls. First that I wasn't heeding, and one that I could not ignore that really helped me kind of complete my journey, if you will. And it's never completed, but you know what I mean, to put me really on the right track.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear about that. What was the wake up call?
All right. So I started out by talking about the fact that I'm an LAPD homicide detective son. And we all know, especially, when you're like school age, we all know the stereotypes about cops' kids and preachers' kids. A lot
Yeah.
of rebellion going on, trying to keep our cool card, so to speak. So I basically, when it came to my father's discipline and structure and accountability, I did everything I could to rebel against it. Now, I don't want anybody to think that this is rebellion at this point in stage. This is just
You
freedom
just
now.
look like a rock star, Keith. That's all.
Well, I was a long-haired teenager. I was chasing identity through music and attention and trying to be something I wasn't. And so I tended to push the boundaries. I definitely pushed in the wrong direction, drugs, bad decisions. I was spiraling. I was also a thief and a liar, and I'm ashamed of where I was at that point in time, but it wouldn't have brought me to where I am today had I not had those experiences and fortunately got them out of my system early on, opposed to midlife crises But along the way, I started getting wake up calls that I can only describe basically as of warnings that I was on the wrong path and I wasn't heeding them. I had vivid dreams. One of them in which I overdosed on drugs in my dream. Another one where I'm priding myself and patting myself on the back. What a cool guy I am. I'm pulling over on the side of Pacific Coast Highway to pick up a male hitchhiker. And the guy, like, he's above the car line standing up and he can't see him, but he's like, "Oh, thanks, man. Thanks so much. I've been out here for hours. No one would pick me up." And I said, "Well, come on in. I'll take you where you're going." And he opens up the door and he leans in. And now he looks like he has seen the devil. He is like completely like, never mind, man. And he looks like he's terrified. This is a dream, mind you. And I turn and I swivel and I catch my vision of myself in my rearview mirror, blood red eyes. I looked like the devil. I really did. And you'd think that that was enough of a wake up call in concert with all of these different dreams and things that I'm telling me that I'm on the wrong. And that turned into the moment that changed everything. One day I ignored my parents and I borrowed from a friend an old MGA convertible sports car. Brakes were fairly bad. I had no business driving it. And I ignored my parents and went out trying to impress people and catch the eyes of young high school females and whatnot. And all I remember is as I was leaving that community I was in, I stopped at a red light and the light turned green and I excelled into the intersection. And that's the last thing I remember of what became a horrific accident. A truck ran a red light doing 60 miles an hour, hit the driver's side of my car. I was not wearing a seatbelt. It ejected me. I went over 30 feet. From what I was told, I had no pulse, no discernible heartbeat, for somewhat like 8 to 10 minutes from bystanders. And, when the ambulance came. Here's what I do remember, though. Even though I don't remember the accident, I have a very, very clear reaction or recognition of a near-death experience that I had. And it felt more real than anything I've ever felt before or since. And it was a presence of absolute love, of being plugged into a source of truth, and there was no voice, no words that were being spoken, but yet like an understanding, like a clear understanding of everything. It was a wake-up call. It was gentle. It was loving. But I knew that it was like my final admonishment. And I knew at the same time that I did not want to come back. I wanted to stay where I was, but I knew it wasn't my time, and I had another purpose in life. So I knew I couldn't go back on my terms; that it was only in God's time. And so I like I said, I didn't want to leave. I was descending, if you will, back, and I didn't have some of the stuff they talk about where you're greeted by loved ones and different things and angels or nothing like that. But then again, I wasn't truly in the kingdom of heaven. So who knows? I just was kind of at the gate, so to speak. So I woke up in the hospital, a massive hematoma in which they said a third of the blood in my body from internal bleeding was sitting there because he ran right into my kidneys, if you will, with full impact of that truck. And they told me I'd never walk again. But yet a week later, I walked out. But the real miracle wasn't the physical aspect. The anxiety I had lived with, gone. My fear, gone. And it was replaced with like a hunger and thirst for knowledge, and peace and a deep connection to God that came out of that. So I returned to my new high school because I was kicked out of my previous high school for being a bad actor, if you will. But I met people that were part of a Christian fellowship that were in high school, and they were telling me that I was quoting New Testament scriptures, but I had never read the New Testament Bible in my life. And where I grew up, again, it was Old Testament through and through. So from that moment forward, I made the decision to live with intention and to honor the second chance that I was given. And to that end, I think, the proof for me was in the pudding. I've been married happily for 52 years. I've got 4 incredible adult children. I've got 8 grandchildren, and I never would have found any of that if I'd remained on the path that I was on. So that moment of truth that I have, and I'm sorry because I'm tearing up. I didn't mean to zoom in. It's an AI camera, so at that dramatic in effect. That moment just didn't save my life, though. It really gave me a direction. And it was funny because I was struggling in high school, and the one that I was kicked out and viewed as just a total loser. And when I was in the hospital, one of the kids from that Christian fellowship said, Keith's fighting for his life. And they put me in to be the student body president for election. Let's give him something to come back for. I didn't have grades to be named the student body president, but I was voted in as the student body vice president. And so I guess at the end of the day, if I had to sum it up in one single line, I would say I didn't find my faith in a book. I found it when I ran out of road, and I had nowhere else to go. So that's my story.
Wow. Wow. What an incredible.
Wouldn't have changed a thing. Wouldn't have changed a thing. I'm the person I am because of this.
So then did you have were there other Christian believers that then came around you and were part of your story? How did you continue to go and learn and grow? It's amazing that you're quoting Christian scriptures.
Yeah. Thank you, because that's such an important part of this story. So though I am 99% Ashkenazi Jew, I refer to myself as a completed Jew or a Judeo-Christian because I also live by the teachings of Christ while still holding on. And again, I'm not, and I don't want to disrespect anybody with what I'm about to say here. I am not into churchianity. I am of the mind of Jesus's words when he asked, "Who am I?" And Peter said, "You are the Christ." And Jesus said, "Upon that rock will I build my church." And the whole notion of where 2 or more are gathered in my name, I have fellowship on an ongoing basis. This is fellowship that we're having right now. We're the 2 in this particular analogy. So that's how I live my life. I love God with all my heart and all my soul, and I live the principles every single day, whether people are watching or not watching. So that's what makes me who I am today.
Yeah.
So I'm honored to be able to say that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Keith, and sharing your heart. And it's also very clear using Jesus's words is that he was always called to love first. And so I know that about you, that you've always been very loving first, and then I try to live that way too and not be judgmental of anyone. And so we have so many Christian and Jewish and non-believers that are even folks that are in our families and stuff, and we're called to love first, and then they'll know that we're Christians by our love. I mean, we're really truly following Christ and following his example.
Yeah. So neither flesh nor word, but I'm here, and thank the Almighty. Many people that I went to high school prior to my conversion, if you will, would have voted me most likely to die prematurely. And I was well on that path. So
they didn't necessarily vote for you for class president then.
Well, in my previous high school where I was booted out, they would have voted.
The new high school voted you class president.
Class vice president, because I didn't have the grade. But I got there because of that hunger and thirst for knowledge and truth and whatnot. So I'm by and large, I think the word is didactic. Where I've become more self-educated than anything else. I read voraciously. But again, that was what was instilled in me. It's just like every day, just devoted to finding one's purpose and continuous growth and improvement, but realizing that we're never there.
Yeah.
And therefore, for the grace of God.
Well, Keith, I've just, in all the years I've known you, I've just come to admire you more and more and more all the time for your humility, for your success, for your knowledge and your wisdom on multiple areas, for the way you've gone through franchise concepts and software and are such a talented musician. I'm just so appreciative of you and just so blessed to be able to call you my friend. So,
well, same here, Todd.
Appreciate you.
And thank you for everything that you're doing to carry forth the word and to have been the founder of franchise faith, brand
Yeah.
faith is just an amazing thing. I cherish our relationship. I think Christy's awesome, and I'm here for you if and ever when I can be of any
I
assistance. So,
appreciate that. I appreciate that so much. Hey, Keith, so if people wanted to get a hold of you Gerson Advisory Services, how would they get a hold of you? Can you give out an email?
yeah, of course. My email address is simply my first name, Keith, Keith, at gersonadvisory.com. My website is gersonadvisoryservices.com. But I also started another organization with Bill Edwards of Edwards Global Services, which is called the Franchise Consortium. So if anybody's interested, please check out the Franchise Consortium, where we do accreditation of franchise suppliers that are dedicated to responsible franchising. There's
Yeah,
nothing like it in the market, so it's going very
that's
well.
great. Yeah, Bill Edwards is another wonderful man and great friend. So, Keith, thank you so much for today. Thanks for sharing your
Thank,
heart. I know you will bless many. So, thank you and have a great day.
thank you so much. Yeah, and God bless.